To The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a diversified media enterprises production. I'm Doug Cunningham.
Of course, we're thrilled about the win. The grad employees at Boston College worked really hard. They worked for several years to both form their union by talking to their coworkers, but also to make their way through all of the legal steps that this took before the National Labor Relations Board. So there's a great deal of excitement, and I think they're celebrating and feeling that we have just moved that movement for grad organizing just one step forward.
UAW Region 9A Director Julie Kushner talking about the union election win for Boston grad student workers. Kushner says these young workers are an inspiration for the future of the labor movement.
These workers are amazing. They're so determined to organize and to be part of the labor movement. And what I see in them is really the hope of the future. These young workers are so dedicated to not just building the labor movement, but really engaging politically to build a better society. It's pretty exciting to be part of this movement, and I feel like we're at the verge of a really monumental victory in this field.
The UAW is active on other campuses as this grad student labor movement continues. Poultry producers like Tyson want the USDA to approve a speed up on chicken processing lines to 175 birds a minute. The United Food and Commercial Workers say it's a horrible idea for worker and consumer safety. The union, representing thousands of chicken processing workers, say workers are already working at breakneck speed, making thousands of forceful cuts a day with sharp knives. The UFCW says workers endure extreme conditions in cramped quarters, slippery conditions, and deafening noise, while being exposed to acidic chemicals sprayed over the poultry or meat moving down the line. Current line processing speed for chicken is 140 birds a minute. OSHA says chicken workers are often denied restroom breaks to keep the lines moving at full speed, and many workers end up soiling themselves while processing the poultry. American Federation of Teachers President Randy Weingarten says the GAIN Act, Grow American Incomes Now, is the right legislative approach to support working people. Weingarten says GAIN Act sponsors Ohio Senator Sherrod Brown and California U.S. Rep. Ro Khanna want to raise wages. The GAIN Act would expand the Earned Income Tax Credit. It's being introduced at a time when Trump and Republicans want to overhaul taxes to once again deliver a tax cut windfall to the rich. Weingarten says Americans need good jobs at living wages. She says if Trump were serious about helping working people, he'd abandon his agenda of tax cuts for the rich and come out to support the GAIN Act and work with Congress to turn it into law. WIN is brought to you in part by the Amalgamated Transit Union, the largest labor union representing transit and allied workers in the U.S. and Canada. Online at atu.org. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit workersindependentnews.com.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show.
I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I could drag it into the bathroom and drown it in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead. Make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
Welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Thank goodness it's Friday. Again, this is like another in a long line of weeks where you go a break, a little respite, a little time to gather one's thoughts, to not be constantly inundated with nonsense and hysteria and back and forth, and just a breath. Just, I don't think we're asking for a full week of sanity, just maybe a day. I look at yesterday's tweet, this morning's tweet fest, yesterday's nonsense. Wow. And look, I think what's going on now is even the conservatives, even the most ardent Trumpites are tiring. Because as you see with the grand deal with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, the right's losing their mind. Because he tweeted out this morning, Donald tweeted out this morning that, we don't want to throw all these people out. And his base is losing their mind because they're going, yes, we do. It's what you told us we were going to do. We were going to get a big bus, and we were going to get all these illegals out, and we're going to throw them out. That's what he told them. And that's what they believed. And he has been on every side of this issue. And this is the one. Because, look, if you go back to the campaign and you hear him talk about health care was, he was going to cover everybody. It was going to be great. It was going to be tremendous. It was going to be fabulous. Everybody was going to get health care. Unquestioningly. And yet every piece of legislation that he's put his name behind, 20, 23, 25, 30 million people will be uninsured. And the base didn't really care. And amazingly, a good portion of the base would be the good portion of the uninsured. Although I don't think they know that, which is kind of scary on a whole nother plan. But the second he started going, wait a second, well, maybe we might want to look at something a little bit different on the DACA thing, on the immigration thing, they have lost their mind. And now you've got the right wing going, hey, impeachment. So stealing health care from 30 million people, not a problem. We're A-okay with it. The second we start saying, you know what, we've educated these 800,000 people, and we've invested in them as a community. And, there are actually vibrant parts of many communities paying taxes, leading, legal, good lives, the kind that, we want all Americans to pursue. That's a bridge too far, just a bit too far. And I don't know what it is about the right. I don't know if it's some kind of an envy. I don't know if it's just the joy of torture and making people miserable like they are. I'm not really sure. Or if it's a whole bunch of all of that. But it's going to be interesting over the next couple of days and weeks to see, how Trump, flips and flops and surrounds this issue like crazy. Because if you look at, this is beautiful. His base are basically Nazis and white supremacists and, and crazy people. Well, yesterday he goes on this rant about the woman at ESPN who tweeted out that he was a white supremacist. Basically said she should be fired, all kinds of craziness. On the exact same day, again, doubling down on the racism thing, again, with the both sides comments and all of that. On the very same day, he signs an executive order saying that they're going to crack down on Nazis and white supremacists. And, it was amazing. He signed this executive order, and in his defense, to be honest, they did put the action parts at the end. And I know it's a couple of pages long. It's like 3 pages long. So I guess it's like 4 pages long. So those last 2 pages are really hard to get through, right? And it says, quote, rejects white nationalism, white supremacy, and neo-Nazis as hateful expressions of intolerance and that are contradictory to the values that the fine people of the United States, and urges that the president and his administration speak out against hate groups that espouse racism, extremism, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, and white supremacy. And I'm going, wait a second, that's his campaign. How is he signing a resolution saying we're going to stop this? We're going to speak out against it. How is he going to do that? Also, it goes on to say, use all resources available to the president and the president's cabinet to address the growing prevalence of those hate groups in the United States. And the other part, the attorney general to work with. Now, the attorney general, are you kidding me? You're talking about a guy who, oh gosh, work with the Secretary of Homeland Security to investigate thoroughly all acts of violence, intimidation, and domestic terrorism by white supremacists, white nationalists, neo-Nazis, the Ku Klux Klan, and associated groups, in order to determine if any criminal laws have been violated and to prevent those groups from fomenting and facilitating additional violence, and the heads of other federal agencies to improve the reporting of hate crimes and to emphasize the importance of the collection and reporting to the Federal Bureau of Investigation of hate crime data by state and local agencies. Now, this is what he signed. He signed this into law. Now, again, in his defense, I don't believe he read it. He just he got the pen. They gave him a nice clicky pen, and he got to play with the pen. I get that. And he got to have pictures taken, and maybe he got a third scoop of ice cream. I don't know, but it was it was a to-do. It was like a big day out. It was like taking your kid to the park. He got some attention, so this is what this is. Got a little bit of attention and signed a bill that he didn't read, and then went on it's both sides, and doubled down on how horribly he handled Charlottesville, and then had the meeting with the South Carolina Republican Scott, the only black Republican senator, and that went crazy. And you go, can nothing be done right? Now, I'm going to change gear a little bit, because I'm going to give the president a little bit of credit. I know I just spent the last 8 minutes going, I can't believe he did this nonsense. But there are areas where I actually agree with some of the things that he will do and has done. One of them is on Wednesday, he blocked a Beijing company from acquiring a U.S. semiconductor company. Now, this is where the right they always focus on the illegals are coming here. I focus on the business part of things. The profit people, the Republicans and a lot of Democrats, they want open borders for goods and services. They want a free flow of money. They want a free flow of goods. They want products to ship across lines without any interference. People, not so much. People were going to wreck giant borders and walls and all of that. Trump, to his credit, and again, I can send the nasty emails if you have to, but to his credit, he upheld the Committee on Foreign Investment of the United States refusal to allow this Beijing company to buy into this U.S. semiconductor technology industry on the argument that it's national security. We need these semiconductors to make our really smart stuff really smart. And if we lose that technology and we have that transfer of technology, because look, the Chinese are going to do what they've always done. It's like the magnets, those magnets that they put at the front of the cruise missiles to make them find their locations. There's only one company in the world that makes it, and it used to be right here. But a Chinese company bought it up and boxed it up and shipped it over to China and recreated the exact factory that was here in the United States over there. And they now make the magnets, one of the only companies in the world to make these magnets, there. So from a national security standpoint, and I've been saying this for a very long time, we need to be having a conversation about manufacturing. Because while he's doing that, you see the Wall Street Journal article that came out that said there was a Chinese firm that smuggled in, and figure this one out, 2.1 million aluminum pallets from China. They just smuggled them in. 2.1 million of them. And you've got crazy people going, there's Mexicans coming across the border. $1.5 billion in tariffs was lost because of this smuggling operation. Now, we caught this one. The question is how much damage, one, did this do from 2011 to 2014? How many jobs were lost? How many businesses were killed because of it? And how many other things is this happening to? Look, if you want to erect borders, it's got to be for everything. Because at the end of the day, what's coming into this country, and understand, at our borders, at our ports, about 1% of everything that comes in is inspected. About 1%. That means 99% of what those containers contain, nobody ever looks at. And we're betting on paperwork. And we know the Chinese cheat. We know it. We know they ship things to Vietnam and to other countries and then have them shipped into Seoul. We know they do this. And yet we're still focused on, we're going to go get those DACA kids. We're going to get the big bus and ship them all out. It's crazy. Absolutely crazy. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Right thing, wrong thing? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about a little bit about gerrymandering and what we need to be doing before 2020 to prepare for the next census. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
And the fly in the oil and when the storm bring the whole thing down. Floodgates are open. We've let the demons loose. The big guns have spoken. And we've fallen for the ruse.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1931. That was the day that came to be known as the Invergordon Mutiny in Scotland. The global depression had begun to sweep across Europe. In response to the economic crisis, the British government began cutting the pay of public sector workers. This included those in the armed forces. This came at a time when more workers were joining the armed forces because of the rising unemployment that ravaged the private sector. For those in the Navy, the proposed pay cuts were 10% for officers and as high as 25% for those under the rank of petty officer. As news of the pay cuts spread, sailors at Invergordon held meetings to discuss their response. Invergordon, Scotland had become an important harbor for the British fleet during World War I. The sailors decided to strike. On the day of the strike, several ships were scheduled to participate in exercises. But the sailors on 4 vessels refused to take their ships out of the harbor. Many men did not report for duty. Naval leaders gave in quickly, reducing the severity of the pay cuts. But many of the leaders of the strike faced reprisals. Some were jailed. Others were drummed out of the Navy. Spies for the Admiralty went below decks to monitor the sailors and report those who might cause future trouble. Government leaders tried to keep the news of the strike out of the news. But workers' rallies against public sector cuts spread to cities like Glasgow and London. The strike also caused a panic at the London Stock Exchange. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections, quite candidly, goes up as the voting populace goes down.
The billionaires don't want you to vote this year. We'll send you a message that's loud and clear that the votes can't be counted in your community. Why even register? Don't waste your energy. Don't go.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, ricksmithshow.com. Good old Paul Wyrick, co-founder of the Heritage Foundation. And again, I love that clip because it's honest. Honestly and truthfully, they're telling those Baptist ministers back in 1980, if we can just suppress the vote of those people, we can win. Our leverage goes up when they stay home, or we can block them, or we can disenfranchise them, or whatever. You combine that with now you've got, and this isn't new, the gerrymandering is not new, it's just more precise and much. You look at some of these maps, wow. Absolutely just wow. And look, as we talked about yesterday, the smart people at Harvard have concluded that our system's broken. They've come out with a study that, look, and I would argue that they're a bit late to this game, but understand, the academic process and all that. I get it. But regardless, they have spoken, and they said it's broken. And I would argue that money and gerrymandering, two of the biggest issues that face our democracy right now, and here to help us go through one of those, the gerrymandering part. I've asked Carol Kunaholm to come talk with us. She is the chair of Fair Districts PA. Carol, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you for having me.
So, I look at this, and you look at some of these maps in Pennsylvania, and I got to think Pennsylvania is one of the worst states in the country when you look at the creative lines that our folks have drawn. Am I off base?
No, we are the poster child, I would say. I do know people argue about North Carolina has some bad ones, Wisconsin, but recent studies by the Brennan Center for Justice show that by any measure, we are either the worst or among the three worst in the country.
Well, I mean, look, we're in the top three and something. That's a good thing, right?
Not good, no.
So, again, I come back to this, and the question is if what we're doing is not the right direction, where should we be going?
Well, most nations, only one other democracy in the world allows legislative leaders any input into the district lines, and that's Malaysia. So every other major democracy in the world has an independent redistricting commission, and we believe strongly that Pennsylvania needs an independent redistricting commission with strong standards for transparency and prohibitions against using any of the data that is available about how people vote, what their backgrounds and incomes and education are, so that the people who draw the lines can't predict, as they do now, how people will vote and therefore determine the elections before anybody casts a vote.
Well, what do you say to the person, Carol, who goes, this has been going on from the beginning of time. We've always had this. This has been part of our democracy for at least 150 years. Why is this a problem now?
Well, I would say we have new mapping technologies that weren't available 20 years ago, so it's much, much easier to draw gerrymandered maps. In the past, they certainly gerrymandered in the past, and they did it with thumbtacks and pencils. And now we do it with computers, and so you can tell a computer exactly what you want, hit a button, and it will deliver it up to you in minutes. So you can use mapping technology. And then, as I mentioned, the data mining technology, there's so much information about all of us that's available online, and things like how precincts voted, what the margin of victory was, how often people vote. There's all of that information is available, so it's possible to predict elections with great precision in a way that wasn't possible 20 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, so much for the secret ballot, right?
Absolutely.
And you gotta wonder with with everything, with all of the problems, and we see these studies coming out, Carol, of all of these the really smart people telling us that things are broken, and I think we at a visceral level know things are broken. You look at this and there's so much. I mean, the districts are one thing. You've got the money problems. You've got all of the information out there. You've got all of these suppression tactics with the voter ID and the caging and the voting while black and the hanging chads and all of this stuff. And it there's part of me that worries that we as a populace just throw up our hands and go, it's all broken.
Well, and that's true. I think a recent study showed that less than half of millennials have any confidence at all in the future of American democracy. I think it was 1 out of 10 black millennials has any confidence in the future of American democracy. That's a scary statistic to me. And if I was a party leader or a legislative leader, I would be wanting to find a way to fix that. I don't see them wanting to fix that, but certainly that to me is part of what it motivated me in this. I was the government reform specialist for the state board of the League of Women Voters of Pennsylvania. When I sat down and started looking at the voting patterns in the state and people's lack of confidence in their vote counting, it pointed me towards this issue of gerrymandering because people's votes actually don't count. I was running a video contest for high school students, and the theme was every vote counts. And the further into that I got and the further into studying gerrymandering, I had this great kind of conflict of conscience thinking, well, the truth is, in most places, in most elections, in Pennsylvania, your vote doesn't count.
Right. I live in a 65-35 district. As a Democrat in a heavily Republican district, my vote doesn't matter at all.
And the thing is, your Republican colleagues' votes don't matter either, because the decisions are made before the primary. Who is going to be the candidate who is going to be elected, whose district it is, and they talk about it that way. That district belongs to that person, that district belongs to that person. It's drawn specifically for those people. So even your Republican friends, their votes don't count either.
See, I'm not against the idea of gerrymandering if you could create districts that were competitive to where you were actually competing on ideas and not who drew the most creative map to ensure one side or the other. Look, this isn't just Republicans getting things. We've created heavily Democratic districts as well.
Yeah, and actually you were referring to the study by Catherine Gale and Michael Porter. They talk about the fact that the system isn't actually broken. It's doing exactly what the leadership wants it to do, which is to create a system in which party leaders have power, in which the only ones who have input are lobbyists and outside interests, in which every voter's voice is shut out. And they talk about the fact that the entire approach creates artificial divisions, and then the parties reinforce the divisions through confusion and mislead voters, and they maintain their power, and they have lots of money tied up in this. It's an incredibly expensive industry, and it's completely non-competitive in any direction because of the way it's structured. So they do point to the fact that drawing district lines is one factor of that. Campaign finance is another factor of that. I want to call attention to another study, though, that just came. These two studies came out this week. So the one from Porter and Gale, Why Competition in the Politics Industry is Failing America. It's a fascinating read. But the other one that came out, which is very important in Pennsylvania, is from the Economy League, Communities in Crisis, the Truth and Consequences of Municipal Fiscal Distress in Pennsylvania. And they look at 44 years of municipal finance and economy in Pennsylvania, and they talk about the fact that they've been warning for decades now that our cities and towns are falling into fiscal distress because of state laws that mandate out-of-date and often expensive rules and fail to give good incentives for those municipalities and townships to work together,
right,
and are completely outdated and completely out of sync with what our towns and municipalities need. They've offered suggestions, they've offered advice, they've asked for specific changes, and no one in the legislature is listening. What they don't do in their report is connect the dot to the fact that in Pennsylvania, all of our towns and municipalities have been cracked out on the legislative level so that there's very little representation for those towns and communities. The lines are drawn so that the person who's elected is really thinking about the farmers, 10 miles out of town, and really not thinking about what's going on inside of that city or that town.
Interesting, and I would argue that with especially here in Pennsylvania with the General Assembly that we have with the tax cut fetish and also the anti-tax pledge people, no help is coming.
Yeah, well, as it is now, no help is coming. If we could get the lines drawn in a way that people actually had to compete with, good ideas and good solutions, and people were able to vote on the basis of who's actually going to serve their community, that would all change. But right now it's so tied up and wrapped up that none of us really have a choice to say this is the person who will really come up with good solutions and enact good solutions. I have to say, though, that we have legislators, we have good legislators in Harrisburg. I was there Tuesday for a press conference, and a number of legislators from both parties came up to me. They are so frustrated with the way this budget process is going on. They're so frustrated with the fact that there is no collegiality at all, especially in the House. One said, it used to be that we would sit down, we would all bring our best ideas to the table, and we would throw the ideas around, and we would say we could do this, we could do this, we could do this, and they would come up with really good plans. And they said that doesn't happen anymore. Things that make lots of sense are simply not on the table. There is no conversation. There's no discussion. They are simply, told to wait around, and then they're told to what to vote for. There's no sense of real representative democracy in Harrisburg right now from anything that I can see.
Well, I would argue that there is a representative democracy. It's just not for we the people. It's for these special interests. And because look, all of these legislators, and I know a good number of them, they want to get reelected. And they don't want to draw the ire of the wealth class and their attack dogs, so they don't buck the system. Because look, you look at these attack groups that come run hundreds of thousands of dollars of ads and set up euphemistically named front groups to attack and attack. I mean, it's really insane.
Yeah, it's really troubling. I would say, though, that we have 96 co-sponsors. We have 2 bills that we're very actively supporting that would create an independent redistricting commission with strong standards for transparency and prohibitions against using personal data. And one is House Bill 722. It has 96 co-sponsors. It's the next most co-sponsored bill in the session this time around. And some of those are Republican, some of those are Democrat. It has Republican and Democratic co-sponsorship, primary sponsorship. There are brave people who are risking a lot to say, we really want to see this change. And I would say anybody who's got their name on that bill, those are my heroes. Those are good people who are taking a great risk to say, we cannot allow the current system to continue. And there's good people from both sides. In the Senate, there's 13 co-sponsors. Again, there's Republicans and Democrats who, again, are saying, we cannot allow the current system to continue. There's certainly leadership on both sides that's how they maintain control. That's how they punish legislators who don't vote as they're told. That's how they please their special interest lobbyists. And so the legislative leaders on both sides do not want to see this changed, but there are many legislators on both sides who would love to represent their people and would love to have all kinds of reforms. This would need to be the first.
No, I think you talk to the average voter. And, the basic premise of, should the voters choose their representatives or should the representatives choose their voters? Overwhelmingly, I would say 99%, because there's always going to be a contrarian. But overwhelmingly, they're going to say, we should be picking them, not them picking us.
Exactly. So what we're saying is people need to make sure that they do vote in the next election, and they do need to see where do their legislators stand. And this, to me, is like the defining issue for the next election. Do you believe in democracy or do you not? And we've got all sorts of, we've been told, no taxes, lots of taxes, tax and spend. These people are for this, these people are for that. The truth is, most of us want to see a functional democracy and want to see our legislators sit down at the table and come up with solutions that will serve all of us. We all want our kids to be educated. We all want our roads to not have potholes. We all want a functional economy, and we all want good solutions that will make that happen. What we have now, it pretty much guarantees none of that. And what would work is if we had legislators who could actually sit down and come up with solutions that would work for all of us. So to me, this is going to be the defining issue in the next election. Are the legislators supporting this change to return power to the people, or are they fighting this change to maintain power in the leadership? To me, that's a really important question.
No, I'm with you. But, the question is, how do you get to that space? I mean, because I think, again, as I said, I think virtually everyone agrees with this direction. How do we get there? Do we need a constitutional amendment? What do we need to get to this? Do they just need to pass a law? What do we need to get there?
So we are supporting a constitutional amendment. As I said, House Bill 722, Senate Bill 22. Our website, fairdistrictspa.com, has a lot of information about this. And if you sign on to our email list, which just join at fairdistrictspa.com. You'll see a join button. Join it, and then you'll get our email. Our goal is to educate people in Pennsylvania. Most people in Pennsylvania do not realize how bad the system is. They don't realize how badly their communities have been hacked up on behalf of those trying to maintain their position, and they don't realize how badly it works. And once I explain this, I've spoken across the state in Erie and Slippery Rock, in Scranton, all over the state, and we've had over 220 public meetings since January across the state. When people hear and see the maps and begin to put the pieces together, they are angry. And so we are starting local groups across the state, and those local groups are going to legislators and saying, support this. I just heard we've passed over 100 resolutions in municipalities across the state. We've passed 12 county resolutions in which local governments say, fix this. We're not being represented. It's harmful to our communities. We need it fixed. And we've just gotten started. We're a young organization, and to me, the more educated the public is, the more insistent the public is on actual functional representative democracy, the more possible it is to make this change happen.
No, I mean, like you said, in a very short period of time, because I guess you guys just started in January, right?
We started in January 2016. And at that point, I was told, I started it with Barry Kaufman of Common Cause Pennsylvania. We had a group of good government groups, League of Women Voters and Common Cause and Pennsylvania Council of Churches and a number of other organizations came together to say, if we don't get working on this, we're in trouble. I mean, we're already in trouble, but it will get worse.
Yeah.
So we started in January 2016, and honestly, we had maybe 3 volunteers and 2 public meetings in all of 2016. We had very little happening. People weren't interested. And we were told party leaders in Pennsylvania will never give up power, and the citizens of Pennsylvania will never pay attention. That's what we were told. And then as we moved towards the fall elections, citizens in Pennsylvania started saying, no one's listening to us. No one is listening to us. Whatever party they were, whatever primary was happening, people were saying, we feel completely unheard and we're angry. And so people started I started getting emails from people saying, I want to do something to change the system. You look like you're onto something. How can I help? So really by January of this year, we were up to, I think, 14 volunteers and began to have public meetings. We had one in Philly. The end of January, 800 people showed up.
Wow.
I was stunned. I showed up. I had said, let's plan for a place that can hold 100. And the guy who was organizing said, let's aim for 200. He got a church a block from City Hall, and when I showed up, it was almost packed. And we're still arguing. He says 900 were there. I say 800 were there. But it was full. And then shortly after that, we had a number of other meetings, and people just were incensed. People felt like, how is it that 2 of the least liked candidates in history were our candidates, and how is it that we ended up where we are? And how is it that we feel like we have so little choice on every level when we go to the polls? Yeah. And so we've been working to educate people. So really, we started January 2016, but January 2017, we just kind of exploded, and we've been exploding every day since then.
Well, good on you. And the website, fairdistrictspa.com. We'll get a link at thericksmithshow.com of how people can get involved. And this is one of those things. It's not partisan. This is about the functionality of the wonder of self-rule and self-governance, and I'm all in favor for it. Carol, I appreciate you taking time for us. As you continue, I'd love to have you back.
Absolutely. Love to do that. Thanks a lot.
Great talking with you. Again, fairdistrictspa.com, the website. We'll get a link at thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. 1-888-520-RICK. 1-888-520-7425. This is The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1845. 5,000 female workers at the Allegheny Cotton Mill went on strike for a 10-hour workday. The fast streams around Pittsburgh and Allegheny City were ideal to power cotton mills. The mills were overheated and filled with dangerous dust. Many of these women and child workers suffered from work-related lung diseases. The 7 factories of Allegheny City employed about 1,500 young women. These women earned between $2.50 and $6 a week. They worked from sunrise to sunset, 6 days a week. Children made $3 a week at most. In 1843, factory owners cut wages even further. In the 1940s, a woman who had worked in the mills noted, the ear filled with the noise of thousands of spindles. Anger over the deplorable working conditions grew. In early 1845, the women and children had had enough. They walked off the job and demanded a 10-hour workday and a living wage. Men supported them by gathering to protect the women from police attacks. After holding out for a month, the women began to return to work to survive. Some of the remaining strikers decided to try and remove the returning workers from the mills. They armed themselves with axes, but could not dislodge the workers. Public opinion turned against the striking women. Then, in September, workers marched on one of the largest area mills. The women broke down the factory gates and forcibly evicted the scab workers. The strike lasted for 6 months, but slowly, out of desperation, more and more of the women workers went back to the mills. Although the women did not get their demands, the strike drew national attention. On Independence Day in 1848, the Pennsylvania legislature put into effect a 10-hour day law. But sadly, the law had numerous loopholes and had no real enforcement. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
These are words you should have told the truth. You're lying in a jail. Now we got the proof. Where you gonna run to? Where you gonna hide? You're running for the door now. No one's getting out alive. Where you gonna run to?
Website, ricksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I look at the gerrymandering, and you look at some of these, honestly, you look at some of these districts, and, one of them where I grew up in Cleveland, what they did in Ohio was amazing. They took Marcy Kaptur out in Toledo, and they meshed her district with the one that Dennis Kucinich had in Cleveland to make really a super Democratic district, to where it's like this really thin line that goes just along the coast of Lake Erie, to where all the Democratic votes are. And they just, you could see that they even penciled out suburbs where Republicans had a stronghold, so that they could put all the Democrats into one super district, and then created a kind of a Cleveland district that, was heavily Republican on the east side. And it's one of those things where you go, masterful thoughts. These people are fantastic at what they do. They really are. They're amazing. The smart people who have dreamt up these programs, just really, really incredible. But for you and me, not good stuff. Because look, my vote, I vote, I'm a super voter. I vote every election, every primary, without question. We go and we cast our vote. And it never matters. Because this is where I live, is a 65-35 Republican district. Never matters. And as she pointed out in the primary, it doesn't really matter for Republicans either, because that game is usually meted out well before the election even happens. Which is why, as I've been saying for a very long time, I'm not against gerrymandering, if it's done in a way to make districts competitive, to where if people got up to vote and said, you know what, my vote matters. This election could be decided by one vote. You got to have something to be involved in, I think. And this is why I think, this idea of getting drawing the districts out of the hands of legislators is a smart first step, just a first step. Because look, the money is just unreal. I've talked to people who are running for Congress, and they're saying, I got to raise $1 million. And you go, $1 million for a job that pays $175,000 a year? Really? And the reality is, for that $1 million that you're raising, how much of your soul are you selling? How much of your beliefs are going by the wayside? And it's one of those things where you look at what happens. The special interests, they seem to never run out of time or money. It's really scary stuff. And then you throw in, all of the other stuff, all of these front groups that are created with these euphemistically cute names like Americans for Dogs and Puppies and We Love Kitties and whatever. You see them all over CNN and all over the place. We're the America First pack, and at some point you've got to rein this stuff in, because there's so much disinformation out there. And I don't know how you go about it. And we've talked about this in the past. I believe in the First Amendment, absolutely the freedom of speech and all that. But do you have the freedom to lie? That's the other part of it. Because, as a system, we've said, hey, if you're in the public sphere, it's fair game. Do you have the right to just outwardly, blatantly, without any sense of shame, lie? And I don't know what the answer to that is, with our legal structure the way it is. The problem is there's just so much money involved in keeping us divided and pitted against one another. And look, it's even within the parties. The Democrats right now are basically eating themselves over Hillary and Bernie, when the reality is we could really be talking about the policies. And as someone who goes, you know what, I want people's lives to get better. I want to pursue policy, because all of this stuff can be fixed. If I didn't believe our broken system could be fixed, if I didn't believe that it isn't irreparably damaged and beyond repair, I wouldn't be doing this. If I didn't believe that there was a chance that we could take this country in a right direction, I wouldn't be doing this. I believe we can. And again, as the Harvard study points out, it comes down to policy. It comes down to statesmen stepping forward and saying, no, we shouldn't be drawing the lines. No, we shouldn't be engaging in this political rancor and this divisive talk. Maybe we should get together and get drunk every once in a while. Just kind of a thought. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, talk media news. Stick around. This is The Rick Smith Show.
Lousy scab, or will you be a man? Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1970. That was the day 350,000 GM workers kicked off a 67-day strike. It was the largest auto strike since the end of World War II. According to historian Jefferson Cowie, it was likely the costliest. In his book, Stayin' Alive, Cowie notes that the strike cost GM $1 billion in profits and nearly bankrupted the union. But he adds it, quote, lacked the proletarian drama that fired journalists' hearts. For Cowie, it was an example of labor management cooperation, a civilized affair. But historian Jeremy Breacher points out that the Wall Street Journal drew different conclusions about the strike at the time. In a series of articles, the paper noted that labor management cooperation during the strike served ironically to get workers back to work. A long and costly strike served a number of functions. It wore down strikers' expectations. After 8 or 10 weeks, workers would be amiable to terms they initially rejected. It also provided an escape valve for built-up frustration over working conditions. And a long strike served to coalesce internal union factions around a common enemy, strengthening the union's leadership in the process. For management, a long and costly strike lent hope that workers would be reluctant to strike in the future. But Breacher notes these ideas about workers' motives nearly backfired. Strikers simply wouldn't budge on their demands. They made gains in wages, pensions, and cost of living allowances. And they were finally able to retire after 30 years. But critics argued the agreement fell short of initial demands, and workers lacked more say in the workplace. This would be a key issue in the many strikes and wildcats in the years to come. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
The most important issues of the day. This is the Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Hillary Clinton on Rachel Maddow last night. She said, quote, I'm hoping that on the really big issues, there's enough authority to be able to restrain and contain the president. That's what we all have to hope, because I think this president and some of the people around him pose a clear and present danger to our country. Congratulations, you're about 6 months late on that one, but hey, at least she said it. Good for her. I look at the book tour as, well, we're going to reignite the 2016 election. We're going to continue to have Democrats eating each other, and I still don't think she's done. I still think she's in for 20. Just mark it down. Anyway, let's find out what's going on around the world and in Washington, D.C. Mike Olesker, Talk Media News. Michael, thanks for taking time for us.
Okay. Did I hear you correctly? You think Hillary's going to run in 2020?
Look, I absolutely think she's going to run.
She will be, don't forget, she will be pushing 75 at that point, won't she?
Yeah, I mean, Joe Biden's talking about running, though, Michael.
Well, I think it's a long shot for both of them, and I think that they are yesterday's news.
I agree.
I don't know any more than you do. We're just conjecturing, but it just strikes me, and with Bernie Sanders as well, he'll be 76 years old in a couple of days, getting late in the game to start a revolution, much as we might like to see it. But look, the Republicans are beginning to discover, rather belatedly, what some of us have been saying for a long time. Donald Trump is not to be trusted, even though in this case I think he did the right thing. He reached across the aisle this week to Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer changed his mind on DACA, the so-called Dreamers, the children of undocumented immigrants. And, he released a tweet that said, does anybody really want to throw out good, educated, and accomplished young people who have jobs, some serving in the military? Well, yeah, somebody wanted to. His name was Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And he got into office as a result of such outrageous remarks as getting rid of more than 750,000 people who are productive citizens who have done nothing wrong.
No, and if you read the comments to his tweet, the right is losing their mind because you had all of these people who they believed it. They believed that he was going to lock her up. He believed that he was going to insure everybody. He believed that we were going to go get a big bus and go get all those illegals. They believed him.
I don't know why anything he does should shock anybody. This is a guy with no real ideology.
Nope.
He has taken both sides on every issue over the course of his life. He's been in both parties. He's really a party of one. It's a one-way street in terms of loyalty. And so all these Republicans and their minions who have supported him are now losing their minds. As you said, Rush Limbaugh went ballistic over this turn of events with Trump suddenly saying, let's leave these DACA kids alone. Breitbart News and Trump's old pal Steve Bannon went ballistic. So did Laura Ingraham and Ann Coulter. Ann Coulter said at this point, who doesn't want Donald Trump impeached? Unbelievable. Representative Steve King said Trump has blown up the party beyond repair. Why are they surprised? This guy is loyal to one person, himself.
So let me ask you this then, as someone who's been around a while and covered this kind of stuff, is this an opportunity for Democrats to to kind of move in and maybe get some policy pushed through by having events and giving him the clicky pen and maybe a third scoop of ice cream and being nice to him? Is that the path forward, or can you never trust this guy?
Well, what you can do is if you can sit down with him the way Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer did, going in that you're smarter than he is, that you understand the game better than he does, that you do stand for something that involves other human beings, that you do have an ideology, that this guy stands only for the art of the deal as he sees it, and really doesn't care what that deal is in terms of other people. His only caring about a deal involves real estate and how much money he can make. But in terms of politics, he said during the health care debate, just put something on my desk so that he could say to people, you see, I told you I would get something done. The fact is, he's gotten nothing done, and that's why last week on the debt ceiling, he went behind Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan, and this week he did it again, and that's why they're so outraged, because they have stood by him through his worst moments, including Charlottesville, which, by the way, he doubled down on yesterday. After meeting with Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina, who was supposed to explain to him, what it's like to be a black person in America and why blacks and others were so offended when he failed to make the distinction between neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and those who were fighting them. Trump once again doubled down, saying there are good people on both sides and tough guys on both sides, failing to make the distinction again. It is so you've got people like McConnell and Ryan and Jeff Sessions who have stood by him through all this, but have gotten nothing done. That has been Donald Trump's one saving grace, his administration's sheer incompetence. And so he is finally saying to these guys in the Republican Party, maybe I can do better if I sit down with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and other Democrats, which is great because that's the American way. You reach across the aisle, you reach for common ground. But in this case, we understand that people like Chuck Schumer, people like Nancy Pelosi have infinitely more brain power than Donald Trump and infinitely greater understanding of how the political game is played and infinitely more sense of ethics and morality and a sensitivity to what is what affects the American people.
Yeah.
He is oblivious to all of that.
So do you think the Democratic attacks slowed down on him and now it's now trying to draw him in so that you make him your buddy now?
You know, it's a day-to-day proposition with this guy. They've given mixed signals on the DACA thing.
No, he's been all over
36 hours, yeah. So, you know, he may change by the end of the weekend. I mean, he saw the blowback. Look, this is a guy, he can read numbers as well as you and me. He knows that he's stuck in the mid-30s. He is also a guy who really, deep down, wants to be loved. And he sees there's no love coming his way. And
we could get him a puppy.
Get him a puppy. That's a good idea. You know, if only we had thought of this earlier, we could have saved ourselves a lot of time and trouble. But he does. He wants to be loved. And so by reaching out across the aisle, maybe he can get some Democrats to say, okay, he's trying, but then getting the blowback, he bent back again because of that. So he is kind of caught. What do I do here? Because he's getting a little bit of love from the Democrats. That won't last because they can see through him.
Yeah.
And the Republicans who he counted on, they're ticked off.
Oh, they are. And the thing that's ironic to me, and you know, maybe you've got a thought on it, where I go back to the campaign. He said, from the healthcare standpoint, everyone's going to be covered. It's going to be a tremendous plan. It's going to be great. Low costs are going to come down. It's going to be great. It's going to be great, Michael. Yet 23, 25, 30 million, whatever number the latest CBO score has out, would be kicked off of the rolls of the insured. And a good number of those would be his supporters. They were okay with that. The second that he said, no, we're not going to kick those kids out of the country because, we've invested in them and they're smart and we need these kind of people, the right lost their ever-loving freaking minds.
Never in the history of American politics where we have known our con men have we known a con man like this. It was all bluster. He didn't know what he didn't know.
Yeah.
Didn't know what he was talking about. And on health care, the real Donald Trump came out after he was elected, and he sat there one day and he said, nobody knew how complicated health care was.
Yep.
Well, yeah, everybody did, except apparently him.
Well, I wouldn't say everybody, Michael, because, I can't tell you how many Trump voters I talked to who said, we don't need a politician. We need a decision man. And, anyone, there's this mentality that anyone can do that job. You just have to be a good decision maker. And what we're seeing is that this stuff is really complicated and takes a lot of brain power to think through. There's nothing that you can do in a knee-jerk fashion.
Well, this is why, even though the Republicans did not like Obamacare, they spent the next 7 years trying to do something about it and couldn't because it is so complicated. And this is a guy with a very short attention span and very little care about details. And so he was oblivious to just what all of his bluster was about during the campaign.
Yeah, I mean, it's scary stuff. And then you look at, while doubling down on the Charlottesville comments, he signs the executive order, the joint resolution that said, we're going to use our power to go after white supremacists and Nazis. It's just mind-blowing to me, Michael.
No, it's whichever way the wind blows at any given moment. And this is a guy desperately in search of a win. And you remember during the campaign, he said, you're going to get, we're going to win so much, you're going to get tired of winning.
Yeah, I'm tired.
I don't know anybody who's tired yet, including Donald Trump. He is hungry for some kind of victory, and that's what led him to reach across the aisle to Pelosi and Schumer. The good news for America is that they are a lot smarter than he is.
There you go. Michael, I appreciate the time. Have a great weekend. We'll see you back here next week.
Okay, pal. Take care.
Always good stuff. And look, I'm pro puppy. I am pro puppy. I think it's a good idea. Get him a puppy to lick his face. make him feel happy. What could go wrong? Going to take a quick break. When we come back, going to talk a little bit about the Medicare for All bill that Bernie Sanders dropped. One of the patriotic millionaires is going to be here sharing his thoughts. Quick break. Right back.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a diversified media enterprises production. I'm Doug Cunningham.
Of course, we're thrilled about the win. The grad employees at Boston College worked really hard. They worked for several years to both form their union by talking to their coworkers, but also to make their way through all of the legal steps that this took before the National Labor Relations Board. So there's a great deal of excitement, and I think they're celebrating and feeling that we have just moved that movement for grad organizing just one step forward.
UAW Region 9A Director Julie Kushner talking about the union election win for Boston grad student workers. Kushner says these young workers are an inspiration for the future of the labor movement.
These workers are amazing. They're so determined to organize and to be part of the labor movement. And what I see in them is really the hope of the future. These young workers are so dedicated to not just building the labor movement, but really engaging politically to build a better society. It's pretty exciting to be part of this movement, and I feel like we're at the verge of a really monumental victory in this field.
The UAW is active on other campuses as this grad student labor movement continues. Poultry producers like Tyson want the USDA to approve a speed-up on chicken processing lines to 175 birds a minute. The United Food and Commercial Workers say it's a horrible idea for worker and consumer safety. The union, representing thousands of chicken processing workers, say workers are already working at breakneck speed, making thousands of forceful cuts a day with sharp knives. The UFCW says workers endure extreme conditions in cramped quarters, slippery conditions, and deafening noise, while being exposed to acidic chemicals sprayed over the poultry or meat moving down the line. Current line processing speed for chicken is 140 birds a minute. OSHA says chicken workers are often denied restroom breaks to keep the lines moving at full speed, and many workers end up soiling themselves while processing the poultry. American Federation of Teachers President Randy Weingarten says the GAIN Act, Grow American Incomes Now, is the right legislative approach to support working people. Weingarten says GAIN Act sponsors Ohio Senator Sherrod Brown and California U.S. Rep. Ro Khanna want to raise wages. The GAIN Act would expand the Earned Income Tax Credit. It's being introduced at a time when Trump and Republicans want to overhaul taxes to once again deliver a tax cut windfall to the rich. Weingarten says Americans need good jobs at living wages. She says if Trump were serious about helping working people, he'd abandon his agenda of tax cuts for the rich and come out to support the GAIN Act and work with Congress to turn it into law. WIN is brought to you in part by the Amalgamated Transit Union, the largest labor union representing transit and allied workers in the U.S. and Canada. Online at atu.org. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit workersindependentnews.com.
Bringing sanity and rational thought back to America. Rick Smith.
Go on, take the money and run. Go on, take the money and run.
So since Wednesday, when Bernie Sanders and 16 other senators dropped the Medicare for All bill, which again, I've been calling for a very long time, and thank goodness we're seeing a move in the right direction. Ever since that moment when it was dropped, the right has been losing their mind. I've been slammed with emails of people going, we can't afford it, we're broke, we're in debt, this is going to cost $32 gazillion. It's the end of civilization if we give everyone health care. Which again, as someone who is a rational thinker, I go, everyone else in the industrialized world, they've figured this out. They've figured out how to make sure everyone gets quality, affordable care, and it doesn't cost anywhere near what we spend. I mean, at some point, don't facts matter just a little bit? That's why I've asked Richard Master to come talk with us. He is the founder and CEO of MCS Industries, also the executive producer of the documentary Big Pharma, Market Failure, and Fix It, Healthcare at the Tipping Point. Richard, thanks for taking time for us. Is he there? I guess Richard, we got a little phone issue. But here's the thing. I look at it and, when Bernie dropped this bill, we kept hearing people talk about, it's the end of, the money's just going to be so outrageous. And, to have a business leader come forward and say, you know what, it's what we need. And from a business perspective, and I've been saying this for a very long time, I don't know why the employer class wants this burden, because it is just that. It is a massive burden on industry, on business, on the ability to produce your product, your widget, your whatnot. To me, the idea, and moving forward, this is the other part of this, that once we get Richard Master back on the line, I want to get into, because the future of this country is not the old industrial base. The future of this country is not how do we, replicate what we've done in the past, but how do we move forward in a gig kind of economy, in an economy where you're gonna jump from job to job, maybe have several jobs, maybe cobble together an existence, but still be able to have that health care, to have that base, to make sure that you, your family, your children get the care they need. To me, again, I go back to this idea of having a Medicare for all system as something that's just common sense, that's just rational. As someone who runs a small business, the reality is, as someone who runs a small business, healthcare is a huge cost. As someone who believes in the entrepreneurial spirit and people, wanting to put their shingle out and wanting to work hard, healthcare should be one of those things that isn't up in the air. Again, we've got Richard Master on the line. Richard, thanks for taking time for us.
It's not working.
Yeah, it is. Are you there?
Write this down.
Richard, are you there?
5.
Okay. I think we're struggling with Richard today. I think we've got the problem here. No, I can hear him fine. He's there. He's just not answering me. It's one of those things where maybe, and this is one of those weird possibilities. Maybe it is that it's just not happening today. But here again, let's go back and roll over this, because when I saw the first ones coming out. There are trillions of dollars that they claim we're gonna spend through our nose, and you go, no, it's not going to cost that much. And as we talked about yesterday, there are ways to do this in a sane, rational way. There are ways to go, hey, we can fund this stuff. There are ways that we can do this that we're not going to break the bank. That we can make sure everyone has the things that they need. And also have the ability to say, look, we understand the future of this country is not going to be the 40 years and a gold watch. We understand that, the employee of the future, the worker of the future, is going to have a really an all over the place kind of existence. And that healthcare should not be in the world of employers. It doesn't make a lot of sense. And to be honest, it's never made sense to me. It really has never made any sense that we've created a system where the employer class is the holder of your health care, because once you lose that job, there goes the health care. And what if you struggle finding another one? I mean, it just seems sane and rational and common sense, which is why maybe we're not going to be able to do it right away. We've got Richard on the line. Richard, are you there?
Yes, I am, Rick.
I appreciate you taking time for us. So walk me through this. I mean, we're told constantly that, sorry, Richard, we'd love to have something as wonderful as single payer as Medicare for all, but we're broke, man. We don't have any money.
Well, actually, you don't have to be a progressive to be in favor of a single-payer health care system. You need to be a fiscally conservative human being in order to appreciate the economic benefits that come with single-payer, and that's that's the reality in a nutshell. I mean, if you look around us at major industrialized countries that maintain healthcare systems that cover all their citizens, they're spending half of what we're spending on healthcare in the United States.
Right.
And so the single payer system, and I'm a business person, a very prudent, cost-conscious business person who I run a $200 million consumer products company in Easton, Pennsylvania. So I'm, not your typical progressive, although I have certainly humanistic views, and I would like to see everyone in the United States covered. But, this is really the prudent best practice for organizing a healthcare system in the world. Single payer.
Yeah, I'm with you, but what do you say to the people who say, and I got this email 1,000 times of saying, the Urban Institute's claiming that $32 trillion it's going to cost.
The Urban Institute is wrong. You can stack up the Urban Institute superficial study with other more in-depth studies, University of Massachusetts. There hasn't really been a serious study done. Rand Corporation, they did one in Oregon. There's another study on the California system that show that particularly in California, the Poland study showed that Californians would save 10% on their healthcare system if they went to a universal government-sponsored or government-financed, meaning tax system financed, healthcare system.
So when you say universal, because there's a lot of thoughts.
That means everyone is covered.
Right, but there are some people
every citizen.
Right, but there are some people who say a universal system is like our TRICARE system, where the government actually employs all of the doctors and all of the nurses and owns the hospitals.
That's not what we're talking about. All we're talking about is the way a system is financed. We want the current delivery of the system to continue to be private. So we'll have nonprofit hospitals, we'll have profit hospitals, we'll have independent doctors, and in fact, what we see in a place like Canada, there are more independent doctors in Canada than in the United States. Recently, all with the accumulation of power of our regional health networks, the doctors are really being collectivized. They're being forced into these massive health combines, and I don't think they like it very much.
No, they don't. In fact, my little sleepy town doctor here just sold out to a giant conglomerate, and he hates it. But, it's like, he didn't have a choice. And this is where, having a one system, one payer, to me, makes a lot of sense. And just having one giant insurance pool. One of the facts I came across the other day is, the public already picks up about 2/3 of the cost of healthcare. All we're really talking about in creating this single payer system is, the people who get their healthcare from employers, which in the future, and maybe you could talk to this better than anyone, the workforce of the future isn't going to be tied to one company for 40 years or even 5 years. We might end up in a gig economy where people are working for multiple employers at the same time.
Well, and that's true. And certainly the system we have right now, it is really, it's an incentive for employers not to hire people, actually, not to give them benefits, to have part-time employees that don't and that are essentially paid less. It's discriminates against older people because older people under the Affordable Care Act and previous legislation, you could charge an insurance company could charge an employer 5 times as much. And now under the Affordable Care Act, they can charge 3 times as much in premiums for older employees. And that, frankly, may not even cover the cost of older employees. So companies like mine are incentivized to to not hire and maybe to figure out a way to get rid of older employees.
Yeah.
So there's a lot wrong with a lot inhumane in our current system.
Let me ask you about that, because you sound like a fairly progressive guy, a guy who wants to do the right thing, and I would assume that you offer your employees health care because it's the right thing to do. But do you really want to be doing that? I mean, I've asked for years, why is it that we're married to this employer-sponsored health care at a time when they just want to make their widgets, they just want to make their whatnots, they want to make their products focus on their business. They don't want to be benefit coordinators.
Well, Rick, this is the legacy of the war industries after World War II. And I don't know if your listeners are interested in the long story, but, these were a way that businesses could get employees when they needed to.
Right. And
they offered health care plans to get folks into really necessary industries. And that continued on, and then the insurance companies arose, and most of them were nonprofit in the beginning, and then they modulated into profit insurance companies because really health insurance providers figured out, how can we get into this game and make some money, and so they isolated the healthiest, youngest employees, offered really great low-cost insurance because guess what? Those folks don't get sick.
Right.
All right. And they older employees were stuck in these nonprofit plans, the Blue Cross Blue Shield plans in general, and they essentially went out of business and were absorbed mostly into the profit-making insurance companies, and even the nonprofits that emerged from this. Adopted the same commercial practices they had to of the more commercialized profit-making companies. And these companies have done very, very well. They're doing, in the last 5 years, there has been certainly a growth in equities in stock prices, but the growth in insurance company profits and stock pricing has eclipsed other businesses in the stock market.
Yeah,
they're doing well.
For me, I just look back to you talk about the amount of profit. I look at the Dollar Bill McGuire, the former CEO of United Healthcare. What was it? He took like $1.6 billion over a 4-year period. And you just go, that's $1.6 billion that didn't take care of someone, which to me, having a profit motive is assigned to healthcare, it should be outlawed completely in my view.
Yes, and the whole issue is what is the value proposition that commercial insurances or this whole insurance it provide to our society? They don't provide care. They're even by their own statistics, there's 17% administrative cost associated with them. In order for us to get insurance in our company, we have to pay an insurance agent's 3-4% as well. So and that compares with Medicare. That if you give $1 to Medicare in taxes, you get 98 cents out to providers. That's hundreds of billions of dollars a year that other industrialized countries don't pay. The way we operate our system, the insurance companies, they're an anomaly in other countries. It's not necessary.
Yeah, I've said if ours were such a great system, other people would be emulating it.
Yeah, Warren Buffett, who's a pretty hard-nosed business person who runs Berkshire Hathaway and one of the wealthiest Americans, said it, really correctly that healthcare, that businesses are focusing on taxes and taxes and taxes, and he said that's misguided. They should be looking at healthcare. The cost of healthcare, he said, was, and I'm quoting him, the tapeworm in the belly of American competitiveness. And we're seeing it, and it's really up to your listeners to make this connection. You know, when we do not get proper regulation of drug companies, when drug companies buy small biomed companies and they amass huge sums of money from Wall Street bankers, and they exploit patents that on innovation that essentially was financed by the federal government, and there's laws about this stuff, you know? And we allow that to happen. We don't regulate that. That costs our businesses and ultimately working families big bucks.
Yeah. But again, as you said, we've already got these regulations, these rules on the books. It's a matter of enforcing it, and it comes back to the lobbyists and how powerful the insurance industry has gotten. So let me ask you this, because you immediately saw the insurance industry come out and say it can't happen. It's not going to work. It's impossible. It seems to me that this is the sane, rational way forward. As opposed to what we've been doing, the path that we're on, because you're right. It's going to take up, in the next couple of years, 20% of our GDP. At some point, the tapeworm is going to kill us.
That's it. We've talked to a lot of physicians, some of them that have run their own practices, and they take us back, and everyone goes into the doctor's offices, and they go and they look in all the files and all the people that are responsible for interfacing with insurance companies. There was a study by the Commonwealth Foundation, a very respected foundation, that it cost every practicing physician $83,000 a year just interface with the insurance industry and for the financiers of care. In Canada, it's less than a quarter of that.
Right. Now, I would argue the Commonwealth Foundation is one of those groups who would be vehemently opposed to your single-payer idea, though.
Well, they at least they've done this study. I don't think they're vehemently opposed to single-payer. Essentially, what we want to do is we want to make the system more efficient. It's so complex right now. It's complex for your listeners to use. It's complex for our company every year to have to negotiate a double-digit increase. And I'm sure the business people who do provide insurance that are listening today have the same experience we have every year. It's a major challenge.
Yeah. So
we spend $2 million a year on insurance in our company.
So last question I've got for you. What do we do?
$10 an hour for a family plan for one of our workers. $10 an hour. Okay.
Outrageous.
So what do you do about it? Well, I'll tell you what we've done is we've produced 2 documentaries, and they can be seen on fixithealthcare.com. Okay? They're also available now on Amazon. But you can get them for free if you just go on our website, fixithealthcare.com. We've also, if you're a business leader, and I'm actually, these have general appeal, but they're really economic studies and very interesting. There are 14,000 DVDs out of our first movie, Fix It Healthcare at the Tipping Point. The second one is Big Pharma Market Failure. So, if you're a business leader, we want you to join Business Leaders Transforming Healthcare, which is an organization, campaign run by the American Sustainable Business Council out of Washington, D.C. And then we're starting now a new plan, a new program. It's called Business Initiative for Health Policy. And what this one is going to do is really focusing on educating the population on the benefits of a single-payer system. Business Initiative for Health Policy, you should look at that very, very carefully. Okay?
Right. No, I mean, at the end of it, my view has always been, if this is going to change, it's going to be your class. It's going to be the employer class that's going to push this. And because the costs are just outrageous, and two, look, it's killing you, and it's not what it's not what you want to be doing.
We're paying $700 billion a year of a $1.1 trillion insurance bill in the United States. Now, and you were right in your remarks. You said that, and look at the federal budget. The federal budget is now 28% health care. National defense is below 20%. I think it's around 17% of the federal budget. So health care is really, it's impacting the budgets, and the Congress is beginning to get it. They're getting it. The Republicans have tried to, take down the Affordable Care Act. They realize they can't do that. It's not politically palatable throughout the United States. So they're painting themselves in the corner, and the only way out of that corner is through some serious structural reform, and that is essentially single payer.
I'm with you.
Yesterday, or 2 days ago, I was in Washington. I participated in the Bernie Sanders press conference. 16 senators have signed on to his Medicare for All bill. 6-7 months ago, I was in Bernie Sanders' office talking to some of his staffers, and it was like looking into a foxhole. I asked them how many senators were engaged in this. She said, "We don't know. We don't have any allies at this point." 6 months ago. So there is now this momentum as a result of the Affordable Care Act debate, and it's time for us to get out of our foxholes and start coming across the field.
Yep. Even, look, you've got Max Baucus, who was the guy who stopped any single payer talk back in 2010, coming out and saying it's where we need to go. It just is. Richard, I appreciate you taking time for us. I'd love to have you come back and share some more thoughts with us.
Very much. I'd appreciate that, Rick. Thanks for the time.
Good stuff. Love talking with you. Again, the website, you're absolutely going to want to take a look at these documentaries, fixhealthcare.com. We'll get a link at the ricksmithshow.com. How you can take a look at that. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Hear what I say. It's money that matters in the USA. It's money that matters.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1931. That was the day that came to be known as the Invergordon Mutiny in Scotland. The global depression had begun to sweep across Europe. In response to the economic crisis, the British government began cutting the pay of public sector workers. This included those in the armed forces. This came at a time when more workers were joining the armed forces because of the rising unemployment that ravaged the private sector. For those in the Navy, the proposed pay cuts were 10% for officers and as high as 25% for those under the rank of petty officer. As news of the pay cuts spread, sailors at Invergordon held meetings to discuss their response. Invergordon, Scotland had become an important harbor for the British fleet during World War I. The sailors decided to strike. On the day of the strike, several ships were scheduled to participate in exercises. But the sailors on 4 vessels refused to take their ships out of the harbor. Many men did not report for duty. Naval leaders gave in quickly, reducing the severity of the pay cuts. But many of the leaders of the strike faced reprisals. Some were jailed. Others were drummed out of the Navy. Spies for the Admiralty went below decks to monitor the sailors and report those who might cause future trouble. Government leaders tried to keep the news of the strike out of the news. But workers' rallies against public sector cuts spread to cities like Glasgow and London. The strike also caused a panic at the London Stock Exchange. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
While our present president's moral character seems stuck somewhere between boorish and brutish, it's only fair to note that he also has an aesthetic dimension. This surprising side of Trump popped out several days after the Charlottesville attacks by raging white supremacists. In a presidential tweet, he said, "Sad to see the history and culture of our great country being ripped apart." Yes, very sad to see a resurfacing of raw bigotry ripping so viciously into America's historic attempts to create a culture of mutual respect and unity in a nation of extraordinary diversity. E pluribus unum, as our national maxim puts it. Oh, wait, that's not what Donald meant. Rather than criticizing those who are out to rip apart the American culture's big idea of egalitarianism, this was just more babble from the boorish Trump. He was actually advocating the continued presence of statues of Confederate champions of racism, pieces of bronze and granite that publicly celebrate America's shameful period of slavery, secession, and white supremacy. The KKK thugs invaded Charlottesville in violent objection to the city's planned removal of a statue of Robert E. Lee, who led the Southern States War against the USA so they could keep enslaving African Americans. Trump's lament, then, was not about the attack on America's humanitarian ideals, but merely about, quote, the removal of our beautiful statues. Apparently, it never occurred to him that most Americans do not consider those statues either beautiful or ours. Ironically, Robert E. Lee himself opposed erecting Confederate statues across the South. Quote, "I think it wiser not to keep open the sores of war," he said, but instead to obliterate the marks of civil strife. This is Jim Hightower saying, we could use a leader with such wisdom today when bigots feel newly empowered to incite civil strife across our nation.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
Monday morning feels so bad. Everybody seems to nag me. Coming Tuesday, I feel better. Even my old man looks good. 'Cause Wednesdays go so slow. Thursday, I don't know. I got money on my mind.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, Rick at thericksmithshow.com. So, last night, the House passed their budget bill through, and we're going to spend $1.6 billion on the Trump monument. Yes, down payment on the big, beautiful wall. Now, we're going to gut money from the EPA. We're going to gut money from, agencies the National Park Service. We're going to gut a bunch of money from other places to pay for this monstrosity. But there's money for the wall. Yay. Anyway, here to talk about this and the insanity that has been this last week. Our good friend Isaiah Poole, he is the communications director there at People's Action. Isaiah, thanks for taking time for us.
My pleasure.
Big, beautiful wall. Big, beautiful wall.
What can I say?
Go.
And a wall that is as they say in Texas, all hat and no cattle. I think there was a congressional opponent to the wall who pointed out that we have two effective pieces of technology to deal with walls. One, ladders to get over them, and two, shovels to get under them.
Yep, I've said that. It'll be great for business.
It'll be great for business. Not nearly as great for the security of the country, which is what people have been saying the wall is there to provide.
Yeah, but here's the thing, and I go back to Ronald Reagan, and I hate, trust me, and you know me, I hate quoting Ronald Reagan. Even he said if we're going to build walls, we have to have doors in them so people can get through.
Yeah, but I think Trump said that there would be a really nice door. It would probably be made out of mahogany and would have like a big T etched in it.
No gold?
Oh, gold for sure.
Oh yeah, and we make a joke out of this, but one of the greatest signs I saw recently at a protest was a girl about 10 or 11 years old, and she was holding the sign saying, "If you build the wall, I will tear it down."
Well, and evoking the image of how we cheered when the Berlin Wall was taken down, because we now history records that as one of the monstrosities of human history.
Yeah, but here's the thing. I mean, we're spending $1.6 billion, they're saying, as a down payment. And I think of that little girl with the sign. That means $1.6 billion that might not go to education, that might not go to health care, that might not go to infrastructure, that's evidently not going to keeping our air and our water clean.
That is exactly right. And I hope that the folk who just heard that have recorded that, because that line that you just laid out there is exactly the message that we need to be carrying over the next few weeks. I mean, this is a budget fight that is going to go to the Senate. It may ping pong back and forth a little through the Congress, and it will climax in December, where we will once again face the prospect of a government that will shut down and a debt ceiling that will not be raised if this is all not resolved.
Which is why I'm hoping Congressman Boyle, who's a regular here on the show, hoping his piece of legislation just to do away with this idiotic debt ceiling goes forward.
Well, that would be the debt ceiling is totally unnecessary. People keep forgetting that the debt ceiling is not about what we are going to spend in the future, but is about paying for what we already spent.
Exactly.
So it's silly to have these conversations about not lifting it. Actually, Trump seems to be amenable to that idea, and certainly the Democrats are.
I mean, it's going to be interesting to see where this plays out. I got to get your thoughts on this other thing. The Senator Scott went to the White House yesterday. They had a little powwow, a difference of opinion on what was actually discussed. Trump doubles back down on his both sides nonsense over Charlottesville, and then signs a joint resolution saying that they're going to crack down on white supremacists and Nazis and all of this stuff, going to use the FBI to track it and all this stuff. What exactly is going on? I mean, I look, I get it when he was a Nazi. I get he's a Nazi sympathizer, white supremacist. Get that. Then the resolution, then back, then forth. Help?
Well, and of course he says we should all love each other, and you've heard him. One of my favorites, actually, of his recent speeches. I'm trying to remember where he was, but he was complaining about how the media had reported on his statement about
in front of the Boy Scouts, maybe.
Oh yeah, the Boy Scout, and was it Boy Scouts? But anyway, he gets up on the stage and he says, "Well, I talked about the white the white supremacists, and I talked about the neo-Nazis."
No, it was Phoenix.
And the that was the Phoenix speech, right? And the KKK, yeah, I got the KKK in there. So he was just sort of checking boxes, and then proud of himself that he checked all the boxes. I think I actually go back to the all of the confusion around the conversation Wednesday night with Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi over the DACA, the Dreamers, and was there a deal? Was there not a deal? And Trump himself was making statements that were confusing. And his staff was saying one thing, he was saying something else, and it took the better part of a day to figure out what was really going on with that. And it is symptomatic of a person who doesn't totally have control of what comes out of his mouth and out of his brain.
And it makes you wonder. I mean, honestly and truthfully, we've had a guest on, pretty regularly since the November election, who's saying, look, there's some real serious mental deficiencies with this guy because, reports come out and there's always conflicting reports on what the reality is. And I know that the right likes to talk about alternative realities and alt facts and all of that stuff, but it seems like almost every conversation someone has with Trump, there's I guess a difference in how it went.
Yes, and we are seeing it increasingly. I think it's more pronounced now than it was at the beginning of the year. I think it's something really important to watch, and we were talking about the conversation with Tim Scott, and then he goes out in public and doubles down again on the both sides stuff about which was exactly the point that Tim Scott said we should not be making right now. There is no moral equivalent.
Right.
And then he signs this resolution, which is, by the way, a non-binding resolution.
Of course, there's nothing to it, but he put his name on it. I mean, I know he.
Well, I think he was backed in. I mean, he had no political option other than to put his name on it.
Well, I gave him a pass because the stuff that made him actually do something was at the end, and I know it's difficult to get to the third page of any document. So I assumed that he read all the stuff about the people who were killed and all of the whereases, but didn't get to the actual doing part.
Yeah, and I think that's what we got to watch. President Obama took tremendous heat for trying to really use his bully pulpit to lead a national conversation on race, and he took a lot of heat for it. He didn't get credit for the things he did right and got, tremendous
lambasted.
Heat for all kinds of perceived wrong.
Yep.
But he did it. He tried. This man's not even trying.
No, he's just, he's stoking the fire with one hand and trying to figure out how to not be responsible on the other. Let me ask you this: there was a dust up, and again, there's part of me that just goes, the office of the presidency should be so revered, should be above the fray, if you will, that you don't get into bickering with an ESPN host.
I'm glad you brought that up.
I used to believe this, and maybe we'll go back to it again, that, look, people are going to snipe, people are going to say things, but the office is above that kind of back and forth. Or am I missing something?
Well, not only that, but let's talk about what we really just had. The White House has called for the firing of a Trump administration opponent in the media. That does not happen in democracies. You may not like what a person says about you, but, the White House, the president, does not call for the firing of media critics. That is chilling.
Every other White House. This White House has called for all the media to be fired. But what do you say, Isaiah, to the person who, and I got this yesterday, and just constantly when talking about this, that Kurt Schilling got fired for his comments. There have been people that have been fired in the past. Why shouldn't she be fired?
Well, I would say that there is a difference between the kind of attacks on ordinary people or classes of people. I think that Kurt Schilling, or hateful comments against President Obama that were made on race, made on the basis of race. I mean, there was a whole class of those kinds of comments made by media personalities. Some people got dismissed for it. Some people, had their careers enhanced because they went after the president. I think, number one, ESPN, in its current incarnation, is, controversy is their business model right now. They hire very opinionated people to say very opinionated things. That's part of their business model. Number two, I take what she said as a, it's a legitimate point of view out there. I mean, I know people disagree with it, but if you look, reasonable people can look at the evidence and look at the behavior of this administration and come to that conclusion and then put it out there for debate. Now, ESPN also has a right to have internal policies and processes that draw a line.
Yep. No, for me, the part of this that is most troubling is, you pointed out right from the beginning, you have the White House calling for the firing. Look, the Kurt Schilling thing was an uprising of people, of viewers, of listeners, of their consumers, of ESPN's consumers. This is literally from the press podium. You've got Sarah Huckabee Sanders throwing in. You've got Trump tweeting out. This is from the highest levels of our government. That has to have a chilling effect on what media people do.
Yes, and this is not how democracy is supposed to function.
I mean, I don't even know that Nixon was this brazen.
He was not from what I mean. Yes, there was that enemies list, but I think the brazenness of it, the fact that we have a very toxic social media atmosphere out there, where you could throw stuff like this out there, and then have thousands of people, ramp it up and amplify it in a way that can really lead to some very dark and dangerous places.
Yeah, I mean, were you surprised at the stories this week about the Russian trolls and Melvin Reddick and Alice Donovan and all the rest of the imaginary people?
Well, I am not surprised. What I am surprised at is the party that used to have Red Scare as part of its trademark.
Yeah.
Is not alarmed about this at all. Is not holding hearings. There are hearings and there are questions that are being raised, but there is not a level of intensity that I think the threat does not match, or the reaction does not match the level of the threat, as far as I am concerned.
Well, here's the thing, and I've had people on the show who've said this, that look, when they were communists, the Republicans were completely against the Russians. Now that they're like them, the Republicans and the Russians are right hand in hand. I mean, I look at Dana Rohrabacher, Russia's congressman.
Well, there's a point there. I mean, Russia is more of an oligarchy that, in some respects, I mean, they've got their 1%, we've got ours.
And they're married together, and which is what got us Trump. Last question I've got for you. Wednesday, the big news Wednesday, of which I'm finally thrilled to say that there's a piece of legislation to get single-payer Medicare for all moving forward. I wanted to get your thoughts.
Well, I think this is what's great about this is that the catastrophic implosion on the Republican side, where they were going to replace the Affordable Care Act with something that was far worse and far more draconian, opened this political space. And we have been making this argument for years, and there have been people in the Democratic Party who have been poo-pooing all of this and saying it's too radical, it's too this, it's too that. Hillary Clinton was one of the leading folk who were downplaying this idea of single payer. Well, now we're at this place where people are realizing that the only way to reform this healthcare system to make it really work is to move toward some form of single payer, period. It's the only way.
No, I'm with you. But I was there years ago. So now we're just finally getting to where I was, before 2010.
Yeah. Now it's going to take, there's a lot of political work that has to be done to really build the majority around this in a way that will withstand the inevitable attacks from the vested corporate interests, the ideologues. But, the Republicans don't have an answer. They proved that. I think now we got to step up, and we can step up.
There you go. Isaiah, I appreciate the thoughts. I appreciate the time. Look forward to talking to you again.
Fantastic.
As always, our good friend Isaiah Poole, Communications Director there at People's Action. If you want to check out their website, we'll get a link at thericksmithshow.com of how you can check out the People's Action website. Quick break, right back to wrap things up and head us right smack into the weekend. Looking forward to it. Right back.
People are ready. Me and my people are just about due. I'm a massive airstrike on a beautiful night. Yeah, it's my song I'm singing. Somebody better start counting. We're coming out. We're coming out swinging.
Not right wing, just right. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1970. That was the day 350,000 GM workers kicked off a 67-day strike. It was the largest auto strike since the end of World War II. According to historian Jefferson Cowie, it was likely the costliest. In his book, Stayin' Alive, Cowie notes that the strike cost GM $1 billion in profits and nearly bankrupted the union. But he adds it, quote, lacked the proletarian drama that fired journalists' hearts. For Cowie, it was an example of labor management cooperation, a civilized affair. But historian Jeremy Breacher points out that the Wall Street Journal drew different conclusions about the strike at the time. In a series of articles, the paper noted that labor management cooperation during the strike served ironically to get workers back to work. A long and costly strike served a number of functions. It wore down strikers' expectations. After 8 or 10 weeks, workers would be amiable to terms they initially rejected. It also provided an escape valve for built-up frustration over working conditions. And a long strike served to coalesce internal union factions around a common enemy, strengthening the union's leadership in the process. For management, a long and costly strike lent hope that workers would be reluctant to strike in the future. But Breacher notes these ideas about workers' motives nearly backfired. Strikers simply wouldn't budge on their demands. They made gains in wages, pensions, and cost of living allowances. And they were finally able to retire after 30 years. But critics argued the agreement fell short of initial demands, and workers lacked more say in the workplace. This would be a key issue in the many strikes and wildcats in the years to come. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
From United Nations headquarters in New York, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, for Talk Media News. The UN says some 400,000 people have fled a violent military campaign in the Asian nation of Burma in recent weeks, with most seeking shelter in neighboring Bangladesh. Those fleeing are mostly Rohingya Muslims, a minority population in Buddhist Myanmar, who are denied citizenship.
This is really the root cause of all of this.
Pierre Perron is a spokesperson for the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, and he's based in Sittwe in northern Myanmar.
Without citizenship, we have had up to 1 million people in Rakhine State who don't have access to some of the basic services that they need, don't have access to education, don't have access to hospitals, don't have freedom of movement without documentation, aren't able to move freely. Traders can't access the market. Farmers can't access their fields. Fishermen can't go to the ocean to fish. some of these really basic things that everyone needs to have a normal life have really been lacking.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has urged the government of Myanmar to grant the Rohingya citizenship, or at least in the short term, the right to freedom of movement and access to services. And while the United States was largely spared the worst of Hurricane Irma, the same can't be said for parts of the Eastern Caribbean. According to reports from humanitarian aid agencies, the worst-hit areas have been Anguilla, Barbuda, the Virgin Islands, and Turks and Caicos. A report by the risk assessment firm NGNER calculates that in Anguilla and the British Virgin Islands, some 64% of property exposed to the storm has been lost, with financial losses nearing $3 billion. The same survey calculated upwards of $7.5 billion of losses on the island of Puerto Rico, and in Florida, just under $50 billion. For more global news headlines, visit TalkMediaNews.com.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
Leave you with some thoughts on the "we're broke" nonsense. And we're going to hear this anytime single payer comes up from now until eternity. There are going to be those on the right who scream, "Oh, we can't afford it. We're broke. We don't have any money." Think about the Forbes 400 in 1982. The very first Forbes 400. It had 13 billionaires in today's dollars. 13 billionaires. That's it. Of the 400. With the economic gimmickry and all of that, 13 billionaires. We now have in excess of 550 billionaires. So again, you go, well, we don't have any money as a country. We're broke. Well, the reason we're broke is we've given it all away. You go, but Rick, they worked hard for that. Look. You look at the infrastructure that was built around us. You look at the investments in education and technology, going to the moon, curing diseases, doing, advancements, and you name the technology. It took investment. And what we did is we had a tax code that said, you know what? We're going to take that investment and we're going to use it. And look, you rich people, if you want to invest in that, we'll give you a tax break for it. Top rate before 1982 was 70%. That was the top marginal tax rate. Before Kennedy dropped it down, it was 92%. We have money. It's just we've allocated it poorly. We've decided that we want to have the largest billionaire class in the history of civilization. And look, it's never enough. I mean, this is the thing that bothers me. It is never enough. You look at between 1983 and 2009, the richest 5% in this country pocketed 82% of all of the wealth gains. So that means 95% of us, we fought over 18% of the crumbs left on the ground. Think about between 1982, the Forbes 400, first one there, and 2011. The combined fortunes of that list, just the 400, not the 150 plus that can't get on it, just those 400 slots. They saw their fortunes soar over 612%. Stop and let that sink in for a minute. So when someone says, well, we don't have any money, we're broke, we don't have it. We have created the largest billionaire class, not just in the history of the world now, but in the history of civilization. We now have a handful of people in this country who have been more wealthy and have more opulence and more than at any point in the history of civilization. I mean, it's really just, it's mind-blowing. And you look at the Sayers and Piketty numbers from 2009 to 2012, that top 1%, that rarefied air up there on the top, they pocketed 95% of all of the income gains, while the rest of us, the 99%, well, we got the fight over 5%. You go, well, that's fair. And yet they keep telling us over and over and over, we can't afford it. We're broke. We can't afford to invest in infrastructure. We can't afford to invest in education. We can't afford health care. Nonsense. This is where we come in. We have to fight back with facts, with information. The fight is on. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great weekend. If you missed the program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you get the podcast. See you Monday.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.